Welcome to another episode of the Silk and Steel podcast. I'm your host, Carl Zha. Today, I'm very excited to welcome back a returning guest, a Taiwanese communist rapper, Comrade Shang Yu. Or how do you want to be addressed, Mr. Shang Yu?
You can call me Xiangyu. Yeah, it's cool.
Okay, well, welcome back.
Glad to be back.
For some of you who are longtime listeners, you are already familiar with him. Last time I brought you to the show, we talk about mostly your family history, your background growing up, how you became a communist, and your very interesting family history tying back to the Korean War. So I got a lot of response feedback. Many people say they actually learn a lot just from us talking about, the recent Asian history. And I thought, well, with your background as Taiwanese, we should start a show talking about Taiwan's political history because there's so much misconception floating around and so many myths. I'm pretty sure you want to dispel them as well.
Yeah, and I understand there are a lot of different views regarding things like, reunification or independence, but my goal is to at least give people the context so then they can better understand, like, everyone's views, regardless of whether they're correct or not,
Well, the beauty of American politics and internet is that, people can spew off giving very strong opinionated views without knowing anything. So it's our goal today, hopefully, to educate and just bring some historical context to Taiwan, because for most people, if the only news they have is from Western mainstream media, all they know is about the Taiwan Chinese mainland tensions. We're gonna bring all the way back from the beginning of the time, from the prehistorical Taiwan down to the present. I think that will really flesh out the political development of the island. Should we begin?
Yeah, and I think we're gonna also, as we bring up certain historical events, we might do a little bit of film suggestions, as you said yesterday when we were talking, humans are visual animals, so it'll help people better put things into context, I feel.
Yes, definitely. So let's talk about the early Taiwan history. Now, would you like to start, or would you like me to start you off?
I really don't know how to start this one.
Let me start off.
Okay.
So, there's actually so little, people know about the prehistorical Taiwan. I feel like we really need to do its justice on my show. So Taiwan existed, way before the mainland Taiwan divide, obviously. Mm-hmm. And it has long been settled by humans since prehistorical times. In fact, one of the, based on linguistic evidence, people believe the Austronesian expansion started out from Taiwan. And by Austronesian, I mean the language family of Austronesian language family, which covers from Taiwan all the way down to Madagascar on the African coast, down to New Zealand and Hawaii. These are like the four. I mean, the Madagascar, New Zealand, and Hawaii are kind of like the furthest Austronesian expansions. And what linguists discover is that like Polynesian language actually, pretty. It's pretty uniform. I mean, the way the language developed is that, given enough time, different dialects start to appear. Then language start to diverge as, isolation builds in, and then different languages branches out, right? But what did they discover while the Austronesian expansion that seems to be quite recent brought a whole range of people and culture spread throughout Pacific and Indian Ocean. Uh, they found the most diverse Austronesian language group is actually on the island of Taiwan. So the model of dispersion is, most diverse place is probably closer to the place of origin. Think of the American expansion and say the Russian expansion, right? It's very recent phenomena in the last couple hundred years, and so that's why you have this whole continental wide piece of North America that's all speaking English, American English, right? And you also have this huge expanse of land stretching from Moscow to Vladivostok on the northern Eurasian continent that's Russian speaking. This is a sign. I'm sorry?
You mean Hai
Haisenwai. Okay. So, yes. Yeah, Haisenwai is a Chinese name for Vladivostok. Before Vladivostok become Vladivostok, which means the Lord over the East. And so the reason the whole of Russia, right, speaks Russian and whole of United States speak English is because it's a sign of very recent expansion. And same thing with the Austronesian language expansion is that they discover the most diverse place is actually Taiwan. It contains many of these Austronesian family. So we know Taiwan has been settled a long time, but that doesn't. Again, this is just based on linguistic evidence. But Taiwan actually had been settled obviously way before the Austronesian expansion. In fact, I'm reading your notes here. That the earliest inhabitants of Taiwan are as early as over 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that they will be arriving from the Chinese mainland.
Yeah.
Because yeah, here you go. You see your notes actually. There used to be a land bridge between Taiwan and the Asian continent. And actually in China, in southern China, particularly the area around the lower Yangtze Delta, that's an area where rice cultivation was developed about 9,000 years ago, right? And then the rice farmers, because rice is super productive, then rice farmers start to push out of the lower Yangtze Delta, spread all across. And we know, the Austronesian people, both the Taiwan Aborigines and people in, say, Indonesia and the Philippines, they're rice farmers, right? So the initial rice farmers, they brought their agriculture, rice agriculture throughout, Southeast Asia. Some of them push as far as Hawaii, New Zealand, and Madagascar. So this is like the history of the prehistorical Taiwan, the time that before Taiwan even appear on written records, because we don't have written records from times of 10,000, 9,000 years ago. All we have are archaeological evidence. But then Taiwan then start to appear in the Chinese records as China as one of the first place in the world that have very complete record keeping, and this was dated to the Three Kingdoms period. Like many of you gamers would know, Dynasty Warriors or the Total War Three Kingdoms that just came out last year. So in the very important Three Kingdoms period, that's when possibly Taiwan, appear in the Chinese records. We say possibly Taiwan because what appeared in the Chinese record is that the ruler of Kingdom of Wu, Sun Quan, he sent basically expedition to a large island, right? To large island, which they believe now, many historians believe that island is referring to Taiwan, but it was not a permanent settlement because it's more of like slave raiding mission because during Three Kingdoms period, there was a large the Han Dynasty at its height, at its peak, had 65 million people. But as a result of plague and civil war during Three Kingdoms period, the Kingdom of Wu, which covered much of southern China, they have less than like 4 million people. And so Sun Quan really needed people to staff his kingdom, and he would send out these expeditions to round up people to bring back. And one of the expedition went to like a large island to southeast. So people believe, many historians today believe that this is referring to the island of Taiwan. Again, they didn't come to Taiwan to settle. They were more interested to bring people back. And then this, the second record of the Chinese contact with Taiwan was much later, after the unification in the Sui dynasty. But there's some controversy about that because the island was referred to as Liuqiu, right? So the Emperor Yang of Sui sent. Actually, I like how you describe it. Why don't you cover this part since your notes right here?
Okay, yeah. So basically, he sent his boys to Taiwan to capture a few hundred prisoners of war back to China. And from this, we can see that there was the intention to incorporate Taiwan into the imperial map, but there wasn't the intention of establishing actual rule over the island. So the Sui troops basically did a drive-by shooting on Taiwan and left.
Yeah, and again, there's still a little bit controversy, basically among historians, on whether the Liuqiu is referring to Taiwan or the actual
Ryukyu Islands.
Liuchuan Island, which is Ryukyu Islands, or what most Americans would know as Okinawa, because in China, the Liuchuan Island, or AKA the Japanese pronunciation is Ryukyu, the Okinawa island chain has had long historical contact with the Chinese mainland, and even though Taiwan is a lot closer to the mainland, but because of the curious effect of the ocean current and the wind, because monsoon wind is very important in Asian trade, and it kind of blows either northeast or southeast direction. So it's a lot easier to ride the ocean current and the wind from, say, coast of southeast China, say from Fujian or Zhejiang to Okinawa, to Ryukyu Islands than Taiwan, right? And the fact that they refer to the island as Liuqiu, which was actually the name of ancient Okinawa.
Different characters though.
Yeah, but come on, that's a transcription, right? Liuqiu is not a Chinese name, so it's a transcription of a native name, Liuqiu.
Yeah. So much with Taiwan actually too.
Yes, we will talk about that when we talk about Taiwan's modern history. So there are some people who, based on ocean current, believe that they actually ended up in Okinawa rather than Taiwan. But by Song Dynasty, Taiwan is definitely on the map, because by Song Dynasty
only Penghu.
Yeah, that's what I mean, because the Song Dynasty there's a set of islands right in the middle of Taiwan Strait, halfway between the Chinese mainland and Taiwan, called the Penghu Islands. So the Song Dynasty and the following after Mongol conquest, the Yuan Dynasty have established administrative units on Penghu Island. So there's settlement, of Chinese fishermen on Penghu Island. So they're already halfway to Taiwan, but they're not quite to Taiwan yet. But they start to be aware of that large island on the other side of the Taiwan Strait.
This is a very important detail, because we're going to get into the Dutch East Indies Company and the other the European colonists. And this is a very important detail. Just keep that in mind. There were people on these islands in the middle of the Taiwan Strait, and there's
Yes.
also the Dutch East Indies Company in Indonesia. So
Yes. Yes. So we're still at the Mongol conquest. So I'm
yeah,
just going
yeah.
to go through the notes. So the Yuan dynasty navigator Wang Dayuan went to Taiwan and noted that people were plentiful and lived long. Men and women both wore cotton clothing.
That might be a translation error. Because 布衣, it's like English. It would sound weird just saying like cotton clothes, like or cloth clothes, but it
Hmm.
was like clothes made of fabric. So I didn't know how to translate that.
Yeah, I mean that he might be cotton because Taiwan
Yeah.
was part of this maritime trade network that spanned Southeast Asia. And we know during colonial times, the Indian cotton was actually highly valued in Southeast Asia, including Taiwan, because, like the kind of the cotton fabric kind of help absorb sweat, in the hot
Hmm.
climate. That's so I mean, you might be cotton. I mean, it's certainly possible because the Indian Ocean Basin trade network that kind of spanned the South China Sea. I mean, that has existed for a thousand years at least,
Oh.
and that would definitely cover the Mongol time that we're talking about. And the Wang Dayuan also noted there were tens of thousands of goats, and they grew flax and mung beans. So the people in Taiwan, they're agriculturists. The Aboriginal people in Taiwan, they were, the cultures are they grew rice, they grew different crops, right? And then again, as we mentioned before, both Song and Yuan dynasty, they established an administrative unit over Penghu Islands, but there's no attempt to extend their rule over Taiwan yet. Taiwan's still kind of beyond the pale of imperial reach. This will start to change a little bit during the Ming dynasty. So this is interesting because getting back to the name, right? Because during Ming Dynasty, Ryukyu Islands, or really, we should use the native Ryukyu language, the Liuchuan Islands, right? In Chinese, they're called in Ming Dynasty texts, they're called 大琉球国, which is a greater Ryukyu kingdom or the greater Liuqiu kingdom, whereas the Taiwan is referred as to the 小琉球国. Kind of counterintuitive because Taiwan is much much bigger in landmass than Okinawa.
Maybe not in
Uh,
popularity. That might be why one is big and one is small. Like,
that's true. That's true
yeah.
because
Like
during
I'm
Ming
taller
Dynasty,
than Lil Wayne, but he's bigger than me.
yes, because during Ming Dynasty, Ryukyu Islands, center in Okinawa, they finally come to be united under one unified kingdom, and the Ryukyuan kingdom, they send envoys to the Ming imperial court asked to be tributary of China, because that allows Ryukyu Kingdom to be part of the Chinese tributary system, which means Ryukyu Kingdom can send ships to trade freely on Chinese mainland as a Ming tributary. And because of that, Ryukyu Kingdom became a trade hub in the maritime trade networks of Southeast Asia, because it's kind of sit in halfway between Japan, Korea, China, and Southeast Asia, right? And it's just a little bit north of Taiwan. So Taiwan is part of that network also, but Ryukyu Kingdom was a more important trade hub.
Hmm.
And but Ming Dynasty is also the time when you also in your notes it says that Taiwan was considered to be 15 countries that not to be conquered, right? So that's your translation of 不征服国之一, right? So
Yeah.
so the Ming Dynasty founding Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang, he after he unified throughout the Mongol rule, he established these tributary states surrounding the Imperial China, they are considered, the good tributary states. So, China will not, in turn, China will not invade or occupy them. So among this is the Ryukyu Kingdom, but Taiwan, interestingly, was considered a kingdom and always considered one of these lands that were not to be conquered. And so again, it kind of implies that Taiwan was kind of just beyond the imperial pale. And but actually, you have more in your notes. It says Zhu Yuanzhang basically said Taiwan was a lawless land that posed no threat to China, and therefore there's no need to conquer it. Which is true. Because at the time, for people on the mainland, Taiwan is more a place for like sailors and fishermen to stop by and getting resupplies, and for some trade with the mainland going on. Because Taiwan at the time, the political development of Taiwan, even compared to Okinawa, it did not have. It has some tribal confederacies, but it didn't even have like kind of the more complex organization like Ryukyu Kingdom on Okinawa. That might be also why it's called 小琉球国, right? The little kingdom of Liuqiu.
Yeah, and another thing I want to mention is notice how he said that Taiwan posed no threat to China, therefore there was no need to go conquer it. That's the thing about Chinese territorial expansion, which is why it's mostly by land and it's not like the European colonists who went all over the world. Is as long as a place was only considered, they only expanded to places where that posed a threat. For example, like with Tibet. It's not simply the case of just Chinese going in and conquering it and making it a part of China, but the fact that there were so many interactions over a long period of time and mutual cases of invasions. So, I mean,
that is a very interesting case, and I will have devote some future episode into it, because originally Tibet existed. It has its own empire. Tibetan Empire was the rival and the equal of the Tang Empire. And from the treaty signed between Tang and Tibet, it's clear that they were co-equals. And then that started to change after the collapse of the Tibetan Empire, especially after the Mongols basically came in and conquered everything. And the Tibetan religious authorities, the Tibetan lamas, went to the Mongol Khan and basically submitted. So that's when, for the first time, Tibet was kind of brought into one administrative unit, by a government that's based in China. Okay,
yeah,
I just covered.
But this is an important detail, because Taiwan, they didn't consider really incorporating Taiwan until it became evident that because of Taiwan's importance in trade, it would eventually either be conquered by the Europeans or by the Japanese, and those people would pose a threat to China.
Well, I think so. Taiwan is kind of just because Ming Dynasty, for most of its part, it has its hands full, and especially towards the end of Ming Dynasty, there's a very, very serious problem of Japanese piracy that was stem, in fact, from the fact that Japan at the time was a lawless, was entering into a very chaotic, this so-called the Japanese Warring States period. So there was left no central authority in Japan, and the different factions, they try to maximize their game however they can, including engaging in international piracy. and the Japanese piracy became a huge problem for Ming Dynasty, because the entire because Ming Dynasty has been in peace for hundreds of years, and there's no coastal defense, and suddenly all these Ronins, which are basically masterless samurai, became employed by these pirates. Some of them Chinese pirates, actually, and then they start attacking Chinese coast up and down from from Beijing all the way down to Hainan Islands, and the Japanese piracy actually affected the whole coast of not just China but also Southeast Asia, and the main response to that was stopping the trade with Japan. Because Japan was really never part of official tributary system, and the fact that the Japanese pirates were causing so many problems, so the main officials just outright banned the trade with Japan. But that creates actually a more incentive for piracy, because the trade with Japan was actually a very crucial source of income for a lot of the coastal merchants, especially merchants from Fujian, so a lot of the coastal merchants actually took to piracy themselves, and they will hire the Ronin, so it's masterless Japanese samurais, who are very good at swords. They're basically literally swords for hire, and by the late Ming dynasty, it was estimated that the so-called Japanese pirates actually it's 70% Chinese, and in fact the biggest so-called Wako, or the biggest Japanese pirate, the head of the Japanese pirate organization is a Fujian merchant. He's a Fujian or Zhejiang, that area, Wangzi. And these people will play this. The reason I start talking about the pirates is because pirates are fun, but they will actually play a huge role in the political development of Taiwan itself. And one of the and just during this time, these pirates, this Chinese / Japanese pirates, will make Taiwan their base, because Taiwan is kind of just outside the imperial reach, yet close enough to be used as a platform for trade and piracy on mainland China. And these so there's the Chinese merchant pirates families from Fujian, Zhejiang, etc. They also had close tie with the Japanese daimyos, basically these Japanese warlords, who also depending on the trade, because at the time Chinese economy was growing so large and so vast, and China being one of the first country in the world to print paper money, and the government just started printing paper money like crazy, and it caused hyperinflation, and eventually the currency crashed, and the whole economy went back to metal currency, which in China was bimetal, silver and gold. But China, while is a major gold producing country, it does not produce enough silver. And it's also around this time, about 15th, 16th century, a silver mine was discovered in Japan. So that created a huge incentive to trade, because there's a huge need for silver in China itself to use as currency. And then there's, the Japan needed to trade for tea, silk, porcelain, all the luxury goods that they desire from China. So there was an active trade in Japanese silver for Chinese manufactured goods, and it's carried because of the ban. Because of the imperial ban on trade with Japan, to skirt around the ban, that's one reason Okinawa or Kingdom of Ryukyu become a trade hub, because Kingdom of Ryukyu is a Chinese vassal, so it's allowed to trade with China. It also can trade with Japan because one of the Japanese daimyo, they took the opportunity to conquer Okinawa, Ryukyu Kingdom, but they made sure to disguise the fact from the Chinese imperial envoy, so the trade with Japan can go on through the Kingdom of Ryukyu. And in the other part, just south of Okinawa, is Taiwan, which around this time became a big pirate base. And one of the famous pirate at the time was called the Captain China. He was known to the Europeans as Captain China. I think his last surname is Li. and he filled a huge fleet of junks that kind of dominated the waters in the Taiwan Strait. And then he was succeeded by one of his protege, Zheng Zilong. And Zheng Zilong, is one of the typical um, Fujianese people who took to the sea for profit, and he landed in Japan. Married a Japanese woman, have a couple of sons by her, and his oldest son, by this Japanese woman, would play a pivotal role in the Taiwan's history going forward. So, just trying to wrap up this real quick, even though this is fascinating, but we really need to get to a more modern period. So, Zheng Zilong, because he was the head of basically he inherited this huge pirate empire off the coast of southeast China. And the Ming dynasty eventually decided, screw it, we can't beat you, but we'll just pay you off. We actually will recruit you into our court as one of our court officials, and then we give you a license to hunt down other pirates, which suited him just fine, which just means he gained a trade monopoly. So Zheng Zilong, then he took
This is the Ming Dynasty version of reform and opening up.
Yeah, well, kind of, sort of. So Zheng Zilong, he got the imperial license to be like the official pirate, basically, and then he defeated his rivals, gained a trade monopoly. He became super powerful. He's a very complex character because he's well traveled. He in his youth he traveled to Macau, then a Portuguese colony, because Europeans are starting to show up around the Ming Dynasty, late Ming Dynasty. That's when the so-called Age of Great Discovery, right? The Portuguese finally rounded the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, and they made it into the Indian Ocean and starting to dominate the trade in the Indian Ocean basin. And then the Spanish, they quote unquote discover Americas, and they also discover huge silver mines in Bolivia, Peru, Chile, Mexico. And silver, as I mentioned, was hugely valuable in China. So the Spanish move into Manila, establish a base there, and use American silver to trade for Chinese goods with these Chinese merchants / pirates. And then the Dutch moved in, right? The Dutch followed suit. They defeated the Portuguese. They were able to grab the so-called Dutch East Indies, which is today's present-day Indonesia. They established their base on Java Island in what they call Batavia, which would become Jakarta today. And so now we have all these Europeans crawling around in the Asian waters, and the Portuguese they tried to basically storm their way into China. They fought a couple of navy battles against the Ming Dynasty navy, and they were actually being defeated. And there was two naval battles. The Portuguese were defeated, and so in the end, they resort to kind of corruption. They bribed the local officials, essentially, to allow them to stay in Macau. It's supposed to be a lease, like they for paying a certain amount of rent annually, they get to set up shop on Macau, and Macau became kind of a center of trade for the European traders that wanted to trade with China, and especially engage the triangle trade between China and Japan, because as I mentioned before, the direct trade with Japan was completely banned by Ming Dynasty imperial government. But the Portuguese, they're able to trade in China from their foothold in Macau, and they're also got a foothold in Japan. They're allowed to trade in Japan. So in the end, rather than bringing goods from Europe to China or Chinese goods to Europe, the trade that sustained the Portuguese in Asia was actually acting as middleman between China and Japan, because only Portuguese, they use their middleman status, and the trade volume between China and Japan was so huge that the most profitable trade for the Europeans at the time was a kind of triangle trade between China, Japan. That's been kind of brokerage by the Portuguese, and then the Dutch, they wanted the in on the same very very profitable trade from their base in Jakarta. They kind of on the periphery of the Chinese Empire, but they're not allowed direct access. So this is where Taiwan is going to play a huge important role, because Taiwan is kind of this island that's just kind of outside of the imperial reach, but yet just close enough to the Chinese mainland that could potentially acting as a springboard into China itself. And then the Dutch actually had a couple run-in with Zheng Zilong, because Zheng Zilong, as admiral slash pirates commissioned by Ming imperial court, he had a trade monopoly, right? He is not about to let Dutch to elbow into his business empire, and then the Dutch actually. So Zheng Zilong is interesting because he in his youth, he spent in Macau, in the Portuguese colony, where he learned some Portuguese. He's able to communicate with these Europeans, and he also was baptized. He has a Christian name, and also from Macau, he gathered around himself a personal bodyguards of former African slaves, because these black Africans, they have no local loyalties, they have no local ties, so they owe their allegiance only to himself. So these are the people he feel he could trust, and so his close bodyguards are these Catholic Africans. And then he has a Japanese wife. He's operating base out of Japan and also out of Taiwan. But by the time the Dutch start showing up, he already most of his operation already moved back to Chinese mainland, because he has gained the kind of the favor of the imperial court. And then him and Dutch was going to have a showdown, because Dutch start to show up, basically try to raid and pillage the coastal Chinese towns, and the Ming court commissioned Zheng Zilong to repel the Dutch. So he starting to build this European style warships on the coast of China in Fujian, because at the time Europeans had couple advantages, military advantages over the Chinese and other East Asian people. That what allowed them to construct this far-flung empire is their fortress. Their fortress built. They have very good firearms, because after gunpowder was passed into Europe, for hundreds of years, Europe was in constant state of war. And so the Europeans got pretty good at war fighting. So they got pretty good firearms. They also have very good sailing ships, because just for the fact of geography, in East Asia, the very important for trade is a monsoon, and the monsoon wind blows one direction half of the year, and the reverse direction the second half of the year. So most of the Asian ships were built to carry on this monsoon trade, whereas in North Atlantic, the weather is a lot rougher, and the wind is a lot more unpredictable. So people like the Dutch, Portuguese, they had to build like really sturdy ships that could sail against the wind. So the Europeans had better sailing technology because their ships are bigger, more their ship hold more guns, and their ships could sail. Their special rigs allows them to sail against the wind, and that's what the Chinese and other Asian people were about to find out. Is when they engage the Europeans' navies militarily on the high seas, they had problems because even when they managed to defeat the Europeans, they couldn't catch them because the Europeans could just sail against the wind and get away. Whereas the Asian ships, their sail is designed to maximize to catch the wind, right? Catch the trade wind to go to the next port. But they're not very good going against the wind. And the third military advantage the Europeans have is the Italian style Renaissance fortress. So the Europeans learned to build this Renaissance fortress that have this bastion sticking out, so that way there's no dead spots on the city wall. They can shoot basically at all different angles, and that allowed them to construct a series of forts in different spots of Asia. So if you look at Portuguese Empire or Dutch Empire, initially they're just literally outposts, centered around a fortress. And because these fortresses are so well built, and because they have no dead spots, from crossfire, it's very hard to take them. So these fortresses plus their sailing ships allow them to construct this far-flung empire all across Africa and Asia. And this will also play a role in Taiwan. So this brings us to Zheng Zilong building. So he's trying to replicate the European success by building the European sailing ship, and apparently he did a very good job, because when the Dutch came to pay him a visit, they marvel at the workmanship that they said that the ship he built matched anything that was built in Netherlands. But Zheng Zilong didn't get to launch these ships because the Dutch launched a surprise attack just when his ship was about to be finished, and Dutch were able to burn all his ships right on the beach. And Zheng Zilong had to resort to kind of a traditional Chinese navy battle tactic, which is he waited for the Dutch ship to cast to set in a harbor, and then at night he sent fire ships, small ships loaded with explosives and gunpowders, and use the wind to send this fire ship into the Dutch fleet. And he blocked the entrance of the harbor so they couldn't escape. So this was a major defeat for the Dutch and revenge for his own losses. And because of this, Dutch pretty much gave up trying to set up an outpost on the Chinese mainland. And also Dutch also tried to colonize Penhu Islands, which is what we talk about. This group of islands is halfway between Taiwan and Chinese mainland. But Penhu Islands is actually part of the imperial territory because it's officially part of the Ming County. So Zheng Zilong, by his great victory against Dutch, basically kicked the Dutch out of the southeastern Chinese coast. At this point, they enter into a peace negotiation, because they still both sides still want to carry on business, trade. So Zheng Zilong says, as long as you clear off the Chinese coast, including Penhu Islands, because those are my responsibilities, I have to answer to the Ming Imperial Court. Guess what? There's this big island across the water, and that's where I used to, I use as a base for my old days piracy activities. You can't have that. So at that, Dutch took that as an official endorsement of them to take over Taiwan, and then this begins kind of the Dutch colonization of Taiwan. And then around the same time, the Spanish tried to expand their trade network from Manila, because from Manila they have to depend on the Chinese pirates / merchants to bring the Chinese goods to Manila to trade for silver. They wanted to get closer to the action, so they also pushed to Taiwan. The Spanish established a series of forts in the northern part of Taiwan, around area around Taipei today, kind of just around Taipei. Whereas the Dutch, they set up base in southern Taiwan, around Tainan, and they built the couple fortress over there. And then the Dutch and the Spanish, they of course they have had a showdown over Taiwan, and Dutch being the rising European power that gave the Spanish a sound beating, and then Dutch became kind of the undisputed colonial power over Taiwan. And originally, when Dutch came to Taiwan, there are already people there, of course, like the Aboriginal people who have been living there for tens of thousands of years. And they're about 2,000, according to the Dutch records, Dutch East India Company records, there are about 2,000 Chinese traders / merchants who are kind of also have their like sacred pirate bases at various points of the island. That's also on the island, and also trading with the natives. And and that's how the Dutch colonial period began. The full interview has been released to my Patreon subscribers. To subscribe, search in Google the Silk and Steel podcast. The Patreon link should be the second one from the top. Or you can go to patreon.com. In the search box, type in Silk. The Silk and Steel podcast should be the first one in the result. I put in a lot of time and effort to put together this podcast, and I do ask you for your support. For $5 a month, you will receive premium patron-only episodes like this that details culture, politics, history of China, its surrounding region, and China's relationship with the world. You will also receive pre-released regular episodes before they have been released to the general public, as well as newsletters detailing everything China-related topics. I hope you enjoy the show, and I hope you subscribe. Thank you for listening.